In this video you will learn what is Redux Saga, why do we need it, and how to use it together with Redux inside React application on a real example. So the first question is, what is Redux Saga and why do we need it? And actually this is the additional library that we can use together with Redux, and we're using it to make asynchronous actions. And actually you might know together with Redux Thunk. This is the easier way to do asynchronous actions inside Redux. And actually Redux Saga is something similar but more advanced and more configurable. And actually if you previously worked, for example, with Angular and NGRX and you use their effects, this is kind of similar. The main idea of Redux Saga is to implement effects, which actually means we're dispatching some action and then our code inside Redux Saga reacts for our action. And typically it will be an asynchronous call, and at the end of this call we can simply call dispatch again with the success action. And I understand that here my explanation is super dry and not really clear. This is why let's implement Redux Saga in our project just from scratch on a real example. So what project do we have here? Here is a small React application just with hooks. And as you can see here we have 3 users, and actually we're fetching them from the API. And here we can just write, for example, test user. I'm hitting add and we're getting here this user. And the main idea that we will use here a database, which actually means we will save a user to our database on the backend. And for our database I am using JSON server. If you don't know what it is, this is just a node package that we can write like this: JSON server watch db.json, and here is the port where we're starting it, and then our db.json file that I created here, this is how it looks like, is giving us data like from the API, which actually means I can just write here localhost, and we wrote here 3004, and here on /users we're getting back our 3 users. And we will use it for a real example how we can fetch data with Redux Saga from the API. And now let's check our project. As you can see here inside source I just have an app.js, and inside app.js I have a component users. This is exactly what we're rendering. And this whole component is just useState and useEffect. So we have here 2 states, one for our array of users and one for our input. And now we have on initialize this getter to get the list of users, and then we're setting them here inside array. And here on the bottom we're rendering our total length of our users. Here we're mapping through users and rendering them, and we have this input to add new users. And when we're clicking on the button, we have here add user function where we're generating new user and pushing it to the array. This is totally fine, this is React hooks approach. The main problem is that all this code is written inside component, and with Redux we can abstract it, move outside, we won't have any business logic inside our component, and it will be much clearer. And also with Redux we have just a single state for our whole application. Which actually means the goal of this video is to use Redux together with Redux Saga to move this code that we have here with fetching and setting our users to additional place. And first of all here we must install all packages. This is why here we must install Redux, React Redux and Redux Saga. And typically we're using just Redux as a library and React Redux for binding of Redux inside React, but here additionally for our asynchronous stuff we will use Redux Saga. And this is important to understand. It is not some new way to write Redux code. We have the whole code just the same. We just use Redux Saga for our asynchronous code, nothing more. Now let's start with configuring our Redux, and actually for this we must jump inside the index.js. And as you can see here I already wrote provider store. This is how we are binding Redux to the whole store. And actually this store is coming from Redux configure store. I didn't write anything here except of basic stuff. As you can see here, first of all, I wrote here Redux, and secondly, Redux DevTools extension. And we really need Redux DevTools to debug our Redux application, which actually means we must install this package also. So just yarn add Redux DevTools extension. And here we have a standard code to set up Redux. We have here first of all our reducers, which is a combined reducers. We have here 0 middlewares, and here we're creating our store, which we're exporting. And actually here inside we're providing our reducers and also DevTools with middlewares. And this is just a standard setup, but now we must put inside our middleware Redux Saga middleware. So here we must import create Saga middleware from Redux Saga core. Or we can just import it from Redux Saga, it doesn't make any difference. And after this here we want to create Saga middleware. This is why here let's just create it. And here we're calling create Saga middleware function, and we're not providing anything here. And now we can apply this middleware inside Redux. This is why here inside our middleware array, we just provide Saga middleware, and it will be directly thrown together with Redux DevTools inside our store. But it is not all, there is one super important line. And actually after we created our store, we must write here saga middleware.run, and we're providing here watcher saga. So what is this watcher saga? We don't have this yet, we will create it in a second. The main idea is that this is listener of all our actions that we want to listen to. For example, we can say, okay, we're fetching users. This is the start of our fetching, which actually means we must tell Saga to listen for this specific dispatch. This is exactly why we need this watcher Saga. And this is why here inside source Redux, here we will pack all our Redux stuff, I want to create a new folder which is called Sagas. And actually here inside this folder, I want to create root saga.js. So what we want to write here is code like this. We're exporting here a function, and here we put a star, and this is our watcher Saga. And now inside it we will write different calls for what we need to listen. The most important part is this star. If you don't know, this is a generator inside JavaScript. And actually this means that this function is a generator which we must provide here inside Saga middleware run watcher Saga. And this is our entry point of Redux Saga. This is why here on the top we can import our watcher Saga from Saga's root Saga. Let's check if it's working. I'm jumping to the console and we're getting an error, cannot resolve Redux Saga. And the main problem is that here I wrote add Redux Saga. This is not correct. It must be Redux Saga package. And as you can see now, we don't have any errors and we can jump here inside browser. But actually here we will get an error. Store doesn't have a valid reducer. We must pass some reducer inside our combined reducers. And actually this is totally valid point. We have here configure store, combined reducers, but we didn't create a reducer. This is why actually here for our component users, I want to create new reducer. This is why here inside Redux, let's just create a new folder which is called reducers, and inside here will be a file users.js. And actually this code is completely unrelated to Saga. This is just a plain Redux code. So what we want to do here, we want to create a new function which is reducers, and here we have state which is our initial state. And here we also get an action, and for now I simply want to return here some state. And now here after this we want to export these reducers so we can put them directly inside our combined reducers. But for this we must create on the top our initial state. So what we will write here? And actually for any asynchronous action we have three different states. First of all it is start, then success and failure. This is why typically you will create the same three properties. First of all it will be data empty array. This is where we will store our list of users after fetching. After this we have isLoading, and we can use isLoading, for example, to show a spinner that we are loading our users. And last but not least is an error, and by default it is null. Here inside we can write some errors from the backend, so we can render them later inside HTML and show to the user. So our basic reducer function is ready. Now we can import it inside our configure store. And actually here inside combined reducers, we can define property users. And here on the top, I want to import, for example, users reducer from, and here we have our reducers / users. And now here we can write users reducer. And let's check if it's working. I will reload the page and we don't have any error. And actually at this moment, we must have our Redux state. Let's check this out. As you can see now in browser, here is my Redux state. I see here correct state. These are our user's property, and we have here data is loading and error, which actually means we successfully set it up Redux, we don't have any errors, and we created our reducer. So now we want to implement fetching of the users. This is why we must create action types. And again, this is just a plain Redux, no Saga here. So inside Redux folder, I want to create a new file, actiontypes.js, where inside we will provide all strings, which will be types for our actions. And actually here we will create 3 of them for start, success and failure of getting users. So first of all, it will be get user start. And here we can simply write get user start. And I will copy paste it twice. So here we will have not start but success. And here it will be failure. And we must change it here on the right, it will be success and failure. So our action types are ready, now we must create our actions to get our users. This is why let's jump here inside Redux and create a new folder which is called actions. And here I want to separate every single type of actions in an additional file. This is why here let's write getUsers.js, and here we will have all our actions regarding getUsers, and we will get 3 of them. First of all, we have getUsers function, and actually this is a start. And what we want to do here, we want just to return an object with type. We don't need anything else. Here is just getUserStart that we are getting from our action types. So this is the function that we will dispatch later. Now I will copy paste it 2 more times, and here we will have getUserSuccess and getUsersFailure. Now here inside type we will use success and failure. But it is not all, because inside our success and failure actions we also get a payload. This is why here we can say that we are getting payload as an argument, and here also, and now we must throw it inside our action. So here after type we will have our payload, and exactly the same we will have inside failure. With that being said, our actions are completely ready, and now we must update our reducers to react on these actions. This is why here let's jump inside our reducers, users, and here inside we must write a switch for our action. This is why here instead of return state, let's write switch for action.type. And here we have different cases. The first case will be get user start, and what we are doing here, inside we want to update our isLoading property to true to show a spinner. This is why here we just merge our state and we add property isLoading and we are setting it to true. Now I will copy paste this get user start because we also need success and failure. So let's change it here to success, and here first of all we want to change isLoading back to false, and also we want to update our data property, and we simply throw inside action.payload because we know that we are getting here an array of our users. And here we have our failure, and inside our failure what we want to do, we want to set isLoading back to false, and we want to write an error, and we will also get an error inside action.payload. And after all our cases we want a default, and actually default here will be to return a state. As you can see, we successfully implemented all cases of our getting of the users. Now we can start with Redux Saga, and for this we want to jump back inside our component, and this is our users component, and here what we want to do on initialize, instead of this axios get, we want to just dispatch an action. This is why here we must get a dispatch function, and we can get it from useDispatch that we are getting together from React Redux. This is why here on the top we must import useDispatch function from React Redux. So now inside our use effect we want simply to use dispatch and dispatch our action, and our action we just created, this is get users, and round brackets, we don't need to pass anything inside. And also, as you can see here, we are getting a warning from React that we must put here dispatch function as a dependency. And as you can see here, get users, this is just our Redux action. So we completely removed the whole business logic with fetching data from this component, and we are simply dispatching an action now. I will reload the page and we don't have an error. Now here let's jump inside Redux and check if it works. As you can see here, we're getting getUserStart action. This is exactly this single line. And as you can see, our state was successfully changed, and now we have isLoading_true_state, which is completely correct. Now we must tell our Saga to react on this dispatch, which actually means when we dispatch this action, Saga must fetch data and then dispatch on its own success or failure. How we can implement that? We must jump inside our Redux, and here we have Saga's root Saga, and this is exactly the place where we define this. So what we want to define here is yield take every, and here inside we want to pass getUserStart, comma, and here getUsersHandler. So what this line is doing? First of all, we must import here take every from Redux Saga /effects. Which actually means here we're saying, okay, with every single dispatch of getUserStart, we want to call getUsersHandler function, which actually means on initialize of our application, when we're calling run inside configure store, this is this line, we're subscribing to all these dispatches and we're waiting for them. And when they are happening, then we're doing something. In this case here, when we're getting here getUserStart string, and this is just a string, we're calling getUsersHandler. And now we must define this handler. And for this, I want to create a new folder here to separate this logic. And here we want to create handlers folder, and inside a new handler, which is called getUsers.js. And inside we also create a generator. This is why here export function with a star, and this function is getUsersHandler. And inside we want to write try catch. Why try catch? Because actually we will make inside an API call. This is why here inside catch we're getting some error, and what we want to do here is yield put, and here will be getUsersFailure action with our error.message. And here on the top we must import put function from, and here we also have Redux Saga /effects. So what it does when we're getting here inside catch after some error, then we will put, which actually means dispatch, this failure action. So Saga will dispatch this action if our API call is failing. And actually we are always writing here put just to make a dispatch. And now here inside try we want to call an API, but actually we want to put this code also in additional file because we will make a request. This is why here I want to create a new folder and call it request. And inside I want to create a file which is getUsers.js, and this must just be a function which will return for us a promise. This is by here export default, and this is a function, and we want to call here our axios.get, and we're fetching here our users. So HTTP here is localhost 3004/users, which actually means this file simply have just a single function which returns a promise. This is what Redux Saga want to get from us. Now let's jump back inside our handlers, getUsers, and here we want to write this request. So here we're getting back our response, and here we want to yield, and we call here a call function. And this call is also coming from Redux Saga. And inside we must provide our getUsersRequest that we just created. So here on the top I want to import getUsersRequest, and it will be our new file that we just created, request/getUsers, which actually means this function is just a promise. And as you can see here, we're not calling it, so we don't have round brackets here. We simply say call, and this is our promise. And this will give us back a response, and after this we can dispatch something. And for this we're writing again yield put, and inside getUserSuccess, and here we're providing our payload, which is essentially our response.data. Because we're getting Axios response, this is the whole response, and we have our users array inside data. So once again, how it is working at all? First of all, we have our root Saga, and here we have a subscription to this getUsersHandler. And actually we must import it here on the top. This is getUsersHandler that we just created, and it is here inside handlers getUsers. So this is this function generator. And here inside we have try catch, and here inside catch we're catching failure and dispatching failure action. And here we're making a request just by using this get users request. And actually this is just a promise of Axios get. And here back we're getting a response, and after we got it, we will dispatch with put again our action success. Let's check if it's working. As you can see here, I am getting an error, attempt import error. It does not contain a default export. And actually this is completely correct. Here we must put brackets because we wrote it just like a named function. Let's check again. We don't have an error. And let's reload our browser. First of all, we see here get user start and then get user success. And here we're getting our data. And actually this get user success is dispatched by Redux Saga. So Saga listened for our start, then made an API call, and here we can see it inside network. This is user's request, and after this it dispatched our success action for the Redux. So essentially Redux Saga is something outside of Redux, but it can use dispatch of Redux to notify Redux that we're getting some data from API. And as you can see here, our state was directly changed. Here we saved our data array, and here we are getting our users directly from API. And our isLoading was changed to false, which actually means the whole Redux Saga is just this watcher, then we have a handler, and then we have user request. And actually this code is completely outside not only React but also Redux. This is why we can easily test it in isolation. First of all, it is really easy to test this request because this is just a promise. Here we can also test our handler with try catch and mock this function, and this is all not related to Redux completely because these are just effects which are happening after dispatching some action. And now we can jump back inside our source users and change this code of getting users. So first of all, here we can remove Axios get, and here after our input value we don't need this users array, but what we need instead is a selector for our users. And here we can directly use selector, and we're getting here the state, and from state we can read state.users.data. So as you can see, we successfully implemented the getting of our users, but now we have set of the user. And actually here we want to create a new user inside the API, which actually means it makes a lot of sense to write all this code also inside Redux Saga. And I want to move this code inside Redux Saga and Redux really fast. This is why first of all we must jump inside our action types, and here we want to create 3 new action types. So here instead of get users, we now write create user start success and failure, and here on the right create user start, create user success, and create user failure. And after this we must create 3 new actions. And actually for this I will just copy paste this file get users, and let's rename it to create user, and we just need to change these 3 actions. First of all, here let's rename it to create user, and here inside we must provide a payload of the user that we want to create, and here we have our type create user start and also a payload. And after this we have our create user success. We're getting here also a payload, and type here will be create user success, and the same is with failure. It is create user failure where we're getting a payload, and the type is create user failure. So our 3 actions are completely ready. Now we must update our reducer. So here we have our reducers and 3 actions. So let's copy paste them completely and just rename. So here we have our create user start, and let's change isLoading to true. Now here we have create user success, and with that we want to add new user to array. This is why here let's create updated users, where we will just merge our users that we have here with new user. And actually we will get this new user inside action.payload. And all these updated users we want to throw inside data property. And here we have our failure. This is just create user failure. And here we just update isLoading to false, and we're getting here action payload. This is totally fine. And now we just need to update our Saga. And here I want to start with Saga's request. And actually here let's create a new file which is called createuser.js. And here we want to export default a create user function. And here on the top, let's write create user function, which will return a promise. And actually here we just get a name of the user, and here we must create a user with such name. So we can call here axios put, and we're providing inside our URL http localhost 3004/users, and here as a second parameter we just provide an object with our name. And I must import axios here on the top. So this is just a function which returns a promise, nothing more. Now we must create a handler. And actually for this I will copy paste this handler getUsers and just rename it to create user. And now we just need to change it. First of all, here we're getting not getUsers request, but create user request, and it is coming from requests/create user. And here we have our function create user handler. And what we're doing here, we're making a call with create user handler. But here is a tricky part. We must provide here our user data. And actually here we're getting an action. And this is just a plain Redux action with type and payload. This is why here as a second parameter we can provide action.payload, which actually means we're saying, okay, I want to call this create user handler and I want to provide this payload inside. And inside payload we just have a name. And here we're getting a response after creating this user. And as you can see here, we must dispatch not get user success, but create user success. And on the error, we want to dispatch create user failure. And now here on the top, we can remove actions get users and import instead create user success and also create user failure. And obviously here I made a typo. We're calling here not create user handler, but create user request. This is exactly what is returning for us a promise. So as you can see, every single Redux Saga is super similar to a previous one. So we successfully created our request, our handler. Now we just need inside our root Saga to register new take every. And here inside we're providing create user start, and here we're calling our create user handler. So we successfully configured Redux and Redux Saga. Now we just need to change our component. This is why we can jump back inside our users.js, and here we can remove completely this const new user and set users. And instead we want to call here dispatch, and we just call here create user action, where inside we must provide a name. And actually we have our name as an input value. And with that we completely removed all logic of creating users or working with API from our component. And we don't need here axios anymore. Let's check if it's working. We don't have any errors. Here I am reloading the page. We have just 3 users. And now here I am typing our new user test. I'm hitting here add user, and we're getting create user start and create user failure, which actually means it was not successful, but our Saga is working because this dispatch was triggered. And as you can see here, our request failed with status code 404. And I already see a problem here. It is a put, but actually it must be post because we're creating a user. Let's check again. I will write here test, hit add user. As you can see here, we're getting a failure with an error. State users is not iterable. And actually, I already understand the problem. Here inside our reducer, where we have create user success, I wrote spread for state users. But actually, as you can see here, we don't have inside state users, we have data. This is why here I need to change it to state.data, and then it must work. Let's reload the page and write here test again. I'm hitting add, and now we're getting success. So first of all, we dispatch start, and now here we're getting success from Redux Saga. And here we can change our state. Now inside our data, we have a new element with name test and ID4 that we got from the backend. And actually here inside network, we can see not only get for the users, but also post to create a new user. And actually you might think now, okay, Redux Saga is too complicated, I don't need to use that. But actually it is quite scalable and it is suitable for the big applications. But we just talked about basics of Redux Saga. But also inside Redux Saga we have quite a lot of advanced stuff. As you can see here in the official documentation, they have concurrency, fork mode, non-blocking calls, and much more. This is why Redux Saga is really a versatile tool inside Redux. And actually, if you're interested to know how to implement pagination inside React on your own without any libraries, make sure to check this video also.